Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pat Kenny. I'm the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. We house administratively the three ROTC units. We're very proud to do that. We know that the students major all over the university, but we are technically the home of those programs, and we're very proud to do that. Thanks for coming this afternoon. Welcome to ASU. Most of the students are here, but if we have any guests, welcome to ASU. It's a beautiful day in the fall, and this is what November is often like, so it's a real reprieve from the summer. It's an outstanding opportunity for everyone at ASU to be able to meet these kind of leaders. These are top military leaders. ASU routinely brings top leadership, speakers, scholars from across the world here frequently. And this is just one more opportunity on a special weekend where we are saluting and honoring the service of everything military, along with service more broadly theoretically thought of. And so the university is proud to do that. So this is a 1 hour panel, and they told me we're gonna switch out at 1 hour, so there'll be another group coming in. So we wanna stay pretty close to that. I'm going to have the guests introduce themselves just for efficiency, and then I have a set of questions we'll lead down. Because we're on a university campus, I'm going to try hard to leave us 10 minutes or so for questions from the audience, just one of our traditions at any university. So let me start right here.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Brigadier General Jason Rushoff, the 56th Fighter Wing Commander out at Luke Air Force Base.
Good afternoon. I am Brigadier General Christopher Sanderson. I'm the Deputy Adjutant General of the Arizona National Guard, and I also serve as a Deputy Commanding General of Division West, 1st Army.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colonel Jared Moreland. I'm the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Army Intel School and Center at Fort Huachuca, Arizona.
Good afternoon. My name is Chuck Dudek. I'm the Commanding Officer at Marine Corps Air Station Yuma.
Hello, I'm Colonel Johnny Ives. I'm the Garrison Commander of Fort Huachuca.
Thank you very much. The framework for today sets around how military classifies warfare into 5 separate domains, and they include land, which is principally conducted by the Army and the Marine Corps; sea, which is principally conducted by the Navy; air, which is primarily conducted by the Air Force; space, which is now principally conducted by the new Space Force; and finally cyber, involving all the services. That's the overarching framework, and a set of questions weave in and out around that framework. So the first one, and we'll start here. I've asked your guests to speak for a few minutes on each question, and if they want to yield the floor, they can, just to move us along, and we'll rotate how we ask the questions. So first, starting here, how does your service use space when conducting military operations?
It's a good question. It's really how doesn't any of the services, for that matter, use space. Space is ubiquitous, hence it's its own service now. But when you look at your GPS watch, we're using space, and it goes from simple navigation in an aircraft or anywhere else for that matter, to how are my weapons, the probability of kill for a weapon, the amount of error it's going to have. That's all GPS related. We have space-based ISR, or intel, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So trying to get an overarching view of what's going on with our enemy, what their force laydown might be, what the integrated air defense systems might look like, and what those statuses are. Those are just a few of the different ways that we use space.
Well, since there's 3 of us in the Army, I'll help with this a little bit and keep it shorter. But we also have the ability to use worldwide communication through the communication satellites. And with the intelligence that you had brought up, it helps with our long-range targeting. Beyond that, with space, it just gives the ability for access, especially with GPS. It really started in the Gulf War, where you could put 2 tanks in the middle of the desert, and they were able to find exactly where they needed to be. So that's pretty high up of what we do.
One thing I'd like to add, both Colonel Ives and I are both Army Space Enabler officers, so we've actually been through training in our past that focuses on space and the impacts of space. And one of the things I think it's important for us to consider is actually things that happen outside of our planet that impact on the planet, and with all those comms that, the two generals have already mentioned, right? So the impacts of solar radiation on those different systems, and then here on the planet as well, all of those have to be taken into account. The more technologically advanced we get, the more you need to actually consider, solar flares, and the impacts on your ability or them knocking out, comms or some of the satellite systems we have in place. So it does matter for all the services. Yes, we have the Space Force, but everyone spends time and effort focused on space and its impacts on our ability to conduct our operations.
I think the only thing unique that I would offer is that the problem sets that we face going forward are undoubtedly going to require the full capabilities across the entire joint force, whether it be the Space Force or the traditional services that are represented. But one of the most important challenges, and space lends itself to that in a multitude of ways, as does cyber for that matter, but an opportunity to gain and maintain a local command and control aspect to it, or capability set. So whether you're talking low Earth orbit type situations, a more traditional satellite infrastructure, these types of things, that ability when you're transiting the Pacific, for example, to have long distances between traditional hubs and whatnot are going to necessitate that we're creative in a way that we maybe haven't had to be before as it relates to the local connectivity that's going to be required for integration of weapons, for lack of a better term, and command and control.
Okay, so like Colonel Moreland said, I'm also a space enabler, if you will, in the Army. And so what I'd like to add to some of the great comments that have already come in is when we look at communication architecture, it's not just a matter of us being able to communicate, it's also being able to take some of our theater airborne and other ground collection capabilities and then move what we call the exploitation data. So we do processing, exploitation, and dissemination of all of that data that we collect. So for example, if you take a hyperspectral theater airborne capability, you're pulling down somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 to 27 terabytes of data every time you collect in a 3-hour window. So when you take that amount of data, how do you move that data back to the US for the exploitation analysts that are sitting in, say, Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, or out into Beale, California, or at NGA in Springfield, Virginia, so that they can look at that data and exploit it properly. And we use space-based assets in order to do that, linked with ground assets in order to move it through fiber optics to get it around the US. We also look at how do we leverage commercial capacity that's already out there. And there are already some great capabilities. University of Arizona, I'm sorry I had to say it, but University of Arizona, Arizona State University also have data analysts that use a lot of capabilities. Arizona is famous for, they develop a lot of the intelligence collection capabilities that we have floating around out there outside of our atmosphere. And so we're able to leverage some of that commercial data that comes off of that to give us ideas of what's happening inside the US, because as you know, we cannot use military capabilities to collect inside the US, so we use commercial capabilities to see ourselves, to look at what's the climate impact on Fort Huachuca or Yuma or Luke Air Force Base. How do we use that data? So we do use space-based capabilities for that. And just for fun, we like to see what other countries are purchasing off of commercial satellites because they don't have their own, and then we get to see what they're interested in also. So we do use it for intelligence collection, just in a different way.
One last thing I'd like to bring up is the five of us just recently talked about what we're doing, but all of the services also have a responsibility to keep an eye on what our adversaries are doing within the space arena too. One of the things I know Colonel Ives, probably got the same, but if you've watched any over the past decade, right, as other nations figure out ways to utilize or conduct operations from space, to include attacking satellites and then the residual space debris that comes from that. Well, blowing up one satellite in orbit, can have huge impacts on, as it continues to, that trash floats around the Earth and impacts other kinds of satellites. So we have to keep our eyes on that as well. What are other nations doing in the realm of space? How are they using it, and how can we then try to block that advantage that they're trying to build against us?
Great. Just listening to this discussion, just as dean of a college, there are three majors that jump to mind. Across the university now, they're majoring in engineering, business, the arts, health, all kinds of things, but geographical sciences and urban planning, where they produce GIS folks all the time. Large data science degree now coming out of the college that is based in mathematics, but has branches into lots of other, and then of course there's a large school on space Earth and Space Systems, where I should know the count, but maybe a dozen missions are currently underway in there. Most of them around satellites, actually, most of them around satellites. Okay, just in case you haven't picked your major, there you go. Okay, starting now down with Colonel Ives, okay? So, and we'll come this way. What nations are most significant competitors in space and why? Are the U.S.'s biggest competitors?
Okay, well, there's the obvious, China and Russia, but I think we can never discount the fact that South Africa, Brazil, and India are also producing satellites that they're putting into space, and it's going to create significant issues for us. And then even as our partners, our friends that we do help launch into space are also creating capabilities and problems for us. South Korea and Japan and their capabilities that they want to put into space because they have to look out for their national interests as well. It just creates what Colonel Moreland was talking about, more space junk that we're going to run into. And so when you look at the big data analysis and being able to study what's really floating around up there, we do need higher level capabilities to understand what's truly dangerous to us because we need it down to the micrometer level understanding of trash. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll stop.
You don't want to
That was a good answer. One thing I would add then, I think, though, is that you talked about the PRC and you talked about Russia, and yeah, they are the obvious, but they're also probably the most dangerous to us at this point. And so we look at what China has, really the PRC has been able to do, which is an anti-area access denial type scenario where they're keeping us out of the ranges that we need to be in so that we can access the intelligence and some of those things. And so for us to be able to do those operations, we have to have access to see in there, and that's where space comes in. But with an anti-satellite capability, which they demonstrated, which is what the two gentlemen are alluding to, and a couple other capabilities, that becomes something that's not assured as well. And so that's something that concerns me as we go into, trying to posture to deter and defend if required out in the Indo-PACOM theater of operations.
Anybody want to follow up on that point? Okay. The U.S. military is completely reliant on the cyber domain for command and control, rapid sharing of intelligence and communications. What are the challenges that your service faces in the cyber domain? And how about Colonel Moreland? Do you want to just start on that one?
I'm actually going to defer most of this to Colonel Ives. Colonel Ives just came from being the XO to the CG of U.S. Army Cyber. He's clearly got much better handle on that than me. But in general, it's some of the things we've already talked about, right? Our ability to communicate all the big data that's out there right now, trying to collate that, especially as an intel professional. What are we trying to glean from all the data that's out there? That becomes challenging. And then again, deny our adversaries the ability to collect on us. It's as technology evolves faster and faster, we just have a lot more that we're trying to do. That's why we've stood up, U.S. Cyber Command. All the services now have their own cyber branch. A lot of time and effort at Fort Gordon, Georgia, to go into the home of U.S. Army Cyber. And again, I know Colonel Ives can speak to that a lot better than I could.
Well, it's awfully nice of you, Jared. Somebody get this man a sandwich. I am coming from Army Cyber Command before I came here to Arizona, and so we see a lot of things. He hit on big data, so I won't hit you on that one. But when we look at what Army Cyber does, well, really what the Cyber Command looks at is, operate, defend, attack, influence, and then integrate all of our cyber capabilities. The operate piece, well, first off, so let's talk about the one everybody's always interested in, and that's the cyber attack piece. And the cyber attack really only counts for like 2 to 5% of any activities that are happening in the cyber network. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way. Yes, it occurs on both sides. But for us, the operate actually accounts for like 80 to 85% of our workforce and the capabilities that we need. And what's really great about the state of Arizona is that NETCOM headquarters in RCC CONUS, which is located right there in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, is responsible for the operate and the defend of our CONUS network for the Army, and with implications for the joint network as well. So when you look at, now you're looking at 80 to 90% of our operate and defend is all happening right here in the state of Arizona, which is why it's so important that the universities are truly locked into what are we doing for our cyber capabilities for the future. The hard part of the cyber network is the influence and the integrate piece. we have a very difficult time being able to see ourselves. Just like everything else, the internet established itself as a cottage industry, meaning that we don't clearly have lines of confluence between certain parts of the network where we can see everything that's happening on the network. So for example, medical command inside the Army does not operate on the same network as the rest of the United States Army, which means that if somebody were to attack into the MedCom network, we would have to have MedCom specific cyber defense occurring. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're as updated as the rest of the Army, which would account for, another 80 to 85% of the network. So when you bring in all those different pieces and then you try to integrate what's the Air Force working on, what's the Navy doing, whereas the Marine Corps on this one, which they're all over the place, by the way, and we appreciate that. And then you look at what are we trying to attack, and specifically what are we trying to defend. When we separate the world, we need a way to integrate all of that, and that becomes one of the hardest parts of cyber warfare, is how do we truly see the battlefield, which is cyberspace. Difficult to do. Thank you, sir.
Marine? Nothing on the Marines? Okay.
I'll add one thing. I think one of the probably most crucial parts of the cyber AOR, for lack of a better term, that we are struggling with is retaining and recruiting people that will stay with the services and continue to do that. So if you haven't already, you'll probably get a lot of offers to go outside of your service once you hit your time that you owe, and at that point you'll have to make a decision between, is that extra amount of money worth it to me to go and work for a Silicon Valley company making $150,000, $200,000, whatever it is, or is the amount of service that I am providing, meaning service as in the altruistic sense, to my nation, is that going to take the day? Is that going to be the reason that I stay? So I hope, and it's a shameless plug, but I hope that you are thinking about making it a career and staying, because that's what we need. We need innovative thinkers. We need technically and technologically savvy folks to stay in and continue to make our Department of Defense the best in the world.
So one of the unique things, I'll say a little differently, as being part of the National Guard, is we were given some cyber assets to actually help with the Homeland Defense. And the uniqueness with the cyber activity is it works more with the defensive aspects for some of our local state and tribal governments. And that has the flexibility to do what you're saying. You can work for a Silicon company, but then we can bring you in for doing a drill activity we had an activity on one of the local government networks, and then being able to provide that help.
Yeah, I was very interested, Colonel Ives, in one of the things you're talking about, and the university struggles with this, and we're tiny compared to you, but is the coordination, integration, and synthesis of the information being pulled from different data sets. Mm-hmm. So that's a big challenge for us, and I'm sure all kinds of companies, and I'm certain you were alluding to that, but getting all of that coordinated so you can look at that. Take an example, we want to look at a class and know what's happening in that class. We got to pull information from all kinds of different data sets to decide what's going on in there, and sometimes it's integrated, most of the time it's not, actually. Yeah, so it's a big, even though we have highly sophisticated data folks, mm-hmm. gathering the data. So gathering the data is one thing, integrating and synthesizing is a whole different problem. Yeah.
Sir, I'm sorry, if I could just circle back real quick on the very important manpower piece that was offered. So the Commandant of the Marine Corps is in his last year of tenure currently, and in his stated goals from the outset, one of them undoubtedly was talent management, where natural recruiting and even retention in some regards is challenging across the board. There's certain capability sets undoubtedly that are even more challenging because of the high demand that's offered. And so just in the construct of traditional HR or Napoleonic construct for the military or the uniformed services, at least not, he's asked all of us, quite frankly, to explore the areas in the space in which we exercise a different model. Maybe someone who has 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years of experience as a network defender or some other niche capability set, maybe they do have opportunity to come in as a staff sergeant or gunnery sergeant or a major or whatever, like we do some other professions such as medical, so on and so forth. But nevertheless, this notion of thinking that we're going to be able to recruit, retain, and wholly grow and gain extended durations of careers out of everybody is exactly the challenge set that was suggested, and that which we probably have to think of a little bit differently perhaps going forward compared to the preponderance of the other force.
Go
Yes, and thank you. I would also like to add, because the general made a great point also of like, there's great opportunities for you on the outside. You get all this training from the military, because it does take 2 to 3 years to have a fully trained cyber operator inside of Army Cyber Command, for example. Same thing for the Air Force and the Navy and the Marines. But one of the things that we were recently able to pass, and it was one of the programs that I got to help out with, was we are now authorized to pay people that have done all of that training market prices for what they would make if they were a vice president of a small silicon company. So they can go and get all of these qualifications, and when they reach that point, we can say, okay, you can leave the military because your time is done, and you can go try to fight for one of these jobs in Silicon Valley, or we can just go ahead and certify you in all of these things, and we'll pay you for that amount, and all you have to do is maintain your certifications, and you can maintain that bonus pay is what it really comes out to be. And we were limited for years on the amount of bonus pay we could pay both civilians and military serving for the government. And now we're able to go up to that amount, which I apologize, I don't know what the exact amount is right now in the market, but when we were working on it, we were looking at 175 to 225 a year.
Anybody else on that? Okay. So the way you've been answering that actually dovetails nicely into this question here. With rapid technological advances in the cyber domain, how does your service educate and train the force to stay ahead of our competitors? Let's start here.
Well, it's become a focal point for sure, but I think our biggest change in the way we've been doing business has been to actually pair with industry and start to bring them into the fold, both in the military and then us also into the civilian side, so that we can understand better how to train, how to expedite the process of becoming a fully qualified cyber warrior. Like you talked about, 2 to 3 years. It's a long time. I need somebody in a year. I need him quickly. And so working with industry has been very helpful with that.
The one thing the Army is starting to do differently is push cyber down into the brigade level commands to give them additional resources. So trying to keep up, instead of having the entire force having a subject matter expert to those commanders, and you're actually seeing that change into the MTO, and then actually changing how some of the organizations within the Army actually exist.
So one of the questions was about the training and education, and so as the Intel Center of Excellence, where we train, as General Hale always says, from private to colonel, all of our Intel professionals, you can imagine that most of those courses involve some sort of access to computers and networks, and so one of the things we're trying to do better than we did in the past is a continuous evolution of those courses to incorporate advances in technology that might have taken a lot longer in the past. So as you're looking at POIs, programs of instruction, it's a constant relook and revamp instead of building a course and saying we're not touching it for 3 or 4 years, because then you clearly fall behind. So it's a constant evolution, looking at lessons learned to be able to, on the fly, something we learned in this class to be able to incorporate in the next class for your warrant officers, for your officers and your NCOs. That's something that's taken a lot more effort in order to stay up with those technological advances and some of the things on the cyber front that we have to implement into those specific course sets. So it requires a change in mindset and in advancing and being more agile than we've been in the past as a training organization to stay up with times and or at best stay ahead of times.
The only thing I'd add, just quite frankly, my services cyber force is relatively young in a comparative sense, acknowledging the requirement that's ubiquitous for all of us, and also acknowledging, quite frankly, that there's a collaborative and joint requirement to it. That's very much the approach that is ongoing, despite establishing a unique cybercom, I guess, as we would call it internally as well. But nevertheless, there's a lot to be learned from the joint partners, and that's very much part of the strategy.
So I would tell you the biggest threat to any of our networks are the people who wear this, because we're the knuckleheads that download TikTok at work. We're the knuckleheads that buy a movie in downtown Baghdad and load it into our system and try to watch it. We're the knuckleheads that are on Facebook trying to buy something off of Marketplace. And when we do that, we open up our network to the threat. And the threat is not always just some sort of Chinese malign actor. Sometimes it's somebody out there who just wants to crash the network. And when they do, then we no longer operate. And if we can't operate, then we're not doing our job in the military. So part of our training is the defense of the network, and the defense of the network starts with the person who's putting this on every day, well, or the greener version of this, right? And that training is not as exciting as you would like. The cyber awareness training, everybody's talked to Marty from the future, who came in to let us know our network has been attacked. Okay, and those of you that have been in the military before, it was Jeff with his cyber vest, right? It's standardized training, and it's not enjoyable, and it's not incredibly helpful, but it does remind us every year to don't plug in a USB drive to your computer. So, anyway, thank you.
Exact same problem at the university. Yeah, exact same problem. Faculty and students open up our network all the time, inadvertently. This isn't a question, I'm just curious. This generation that are aspiring officers here are what we call in the education business as, they're born almost computer literate. They're way ahead of the generations, just 5 to 8 years ahead of them, let alone 10. I have 5 grandkids. The oldest is 8. The one is 1, and he's already messing around on my phone. So they're just in this all the time. Is the training easier with this aspiring generation, quicker, because of all their skills they're arriving with, or are they on things that just isn't really relevant for what you need them to do, or maybe a little bit of both? I'm just curious.
I'll just jump right in. I think flying fighters is a video game, quite honestly, right? So, and the touch screen, the F-35, that's about 2 feet across, and dude can talk to this as well. That's exactly what it is. It's manipulating data. It's getting the information and then figuring out how best and how fast you can pass it to everybody else out in the battlefield. And so I have found that the training for the young lieutenants that show up is markedly, they're better, first of all, but the training is markedly more well received, and they digest it quicker, and they get into the parts that might take, and I have to say, you said 5 to 10 years, they're much further ahead. I think we're a little older than 10 years ahead of most of these people, so I don't know how far behind we are, but it's a big difference, and you can see it in the training, you can see it in the progress, you can see it out there flying with them.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
At the schoolhouse, we absolutely see, all you have to do is look at, I've got an 8-year-old daughter, and, in 2 weeks, she picked up stuff that took, my parents or my in-laws, messing around on their phone, a year to figure out how to open an app or download an app, right? It's just that muscle memory that they've learned because they've grown up with this technology that the rest of us didn't. We had to adopt. You're not adopting anything. It's part of what you've grown up with, since you were born. So at least at the schoolhouse, we do see there is an aptitude for more technology-based, environments than some of us that are a little bit more aged. It takes us sometimes a little bit longer than some of the younger. So I think that's helpful, and we're trying to base our training on that because it's also how you learn. Right? I mean, you think about folks before TV. I mean, it was all pretty much experience or book learning. Then TV comes around and video, and everyone now carries these little supercomputers around in their pockets. Some of us too. I think that all adds into how we need to focus on, as a service, how do we train better using the technology that people have come up with to enhance their learning environments.
Just offer, we see it across the portfolio from integrated simulators, be it for aviation or the conduct of ground fires. Ultimately, there's times and places where you have to just get out and do it for sure, but the efficiency and the cost-effective nature of some of the technologies is undoubtedly a benefit that folks enjoy and do well with.
So it's very unique and an outstanding opportunity for you all to have this many outstanding leaders in one location. So this next question is to allow them to provide a little advice on the things that they've learned along the way. How have they been educated and trained to lead the U.S. forces? What are they looking for when you all arrive, or the people they command? What are they looking for when you all arrive? So I just thought I'd let you run down some of those characteristics of leadership that you're interested in, that you see, that you learned. And you can take it any way you want, actually.
Okay. I will not say everything. That way you guys have That's the beauty of going first, right? I'll keep it very simple, and we talked about it a little earlier this morning, but humility is a big one. Understanding that, I mean, even us sitting up here, we've got answers. They're probably not the best. They're probably not the only. I know they're not the only. But that humility is important. When you walk into your first unit, your airmen, your Marines, your sailors, your guardsmen, your guardians, everyone is going to be looking at you, and they're going to decide whether or not you're the kind of leader they want to follow. And if you are humble, and a mantra that we have at the weapons school is humble, approachable, incredible. And the first one of those is humble. And if you are humble, they will listen to you, and you will learn a lot, and you will become a better leader. And then they will follow you because they trust you. And I think that, when you get down to it, humility leads to trust.
You're going to end up having a lifelong learning throughout the rest of your careers and the rest of your life. Things change. It's changed dramatically for all of us. And we constantly learn, constantly seek out new information, constantly find a way to make yourself a little bit better every day. If you do that with your leadership, that your soldiers, your airmen will create a learning organization, and you'll find a way to solve all your problems.
Thanks, sir. I think the one thing I'd just throw out is integrity. I know it was discussed this morning as well. When a lot of folks, I don't remember exactly what what it is, but there's something out there that talks about the military being one of the most trusted professions, one of the most respected professions in the United States, and that continues to remain high. But that only continues to remain high if the people that we serve continue to have trust in our military, right? So, unfortunately, the way that the media is every bad thing that happens in the military is exemplified, and all the good things that are happening on a day-to-day basis don't quite get the same coverage. But we need leaders, we need soldiers of all, and airmen, Marines. All of our service members have to have integrity, have to be above reproach, because every one of us every one of us wears the United States flag on our uniform, and every one of us represents the people that we've sworn to serve. So if you don't have integrity, if our populace can't trust you and us to do the right things when no one's looking, then we've hurt ourselves in the eyes of the people that we're entrusted to serve. So I'd say just having integrity and the moral courage to do what's right, even when no one's looking, that's really something that we look forward in all of our service members, because without it, we're not a credible organization, and we have to have that for the people that we serve.
Not nearly as profound, and I mean that in all sincerity, but when we take opportunities like this to come together, it's a whole lot of fun. And the general alluded to it earlier today, but it's not every day that we get a chance to combine forces as representative of that which is exactly required to ultimately fight and win in the exceptionally challenging spaces that we're all going to have to operate down the road. And so, again, I'm borrowing a point made earlier, but it resonated with me so much, I just want to emphasize it or double down on it again, that when you have opportunity to be in group settings to meet people, reach out, learn what they're doing, learn what you're doing. I've learned a tremendous amount today just on this very panel right now, and those exact points and relationships that you build are going to be leveraged more often than you can possibly imagine. I would just say embrace it, have fun with it, and just win.
That's great. So I look for people that can enable success of their own people through a culture of trust and shared understanding. And so when we take trust and break that down, it goes right to what Colonel Moreland was saying, that trust is, character and competence, and your character is what you do when nobody's looking. And the test I always tell people is, I'm not going to ask you to do it, but if I were to tell you to take off one of your boots, how many of you have white socks on? Don't raise your hands, okay? That was a trick. But that's what it is. The uniform standard is for in the Army, you don't wear white socks in your boots. So if you are, then that's somebody who's doing something when nobody's looking. So look for those people. And then the competence piece is just be good at your job, understand where you are and where you're supposed to be going. And then the shared understanding means that you're somebody who can communicate where you want to go, where you want the organization to go. And more importantly, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You're listening to your people.
So one thing here at the university is 1/3 of all the students at inter-ASU are the first in their family lineage, many of you might be in this, who have ever gone to college. Okay, so We worry a lot about resiliency. We call it resiliency, but able to determination, stay with it, because you can't pick up the phone and call home and say, I'm struggling in Calc 101, and your parents, neither one of them, went to college. They don't have an aunt and uncle that went to college. For them to say, everybody struggles in Calc 101. Just hang in there. And are you talking to the right people? Are you seeking tutorial help? All that kind of stuff we provide. I'm guessing you have a large number of your not the officers, but a large number of your populations are coming in as they may or may not have backgrounds in the military. But resilience must be important throughout the whole force. Did you want to comment on that at all? It's the same characteristic we're hoping to build at the same time.
I think I know in the Army we build the resiliency. We actually do have programs to do it, but above and beyond, it's teamwork, it's that first line leadership. Understanding who your soldiers, your airmen, your Marines are, getting to know what their problems are, and being able to find those resources for it. The military services have quite a few resources depending on what that problem is, and it really comes down to developing that first line leadership where that NCO knows what's happening with that soldier, sailor, Marine, and being able to elevate it up so we can get that help. And that builds the resiliency, it builds the trust within the team.
Yeah, if I could, just two things that I'd add to that. One is to glom on to what General Sanderson said is engaged leadership, right? Being engaged, being involved in the lives of your people, so you can tell when something's off. If you're hands off, always hiding in your office, you can't necessarily see those small changes in your personnel. The other thing that the leaders have to know is they have to know what resources are available on your base, in the community, or in the larger, sense, so that if a service member or family member is having challenges, because we all react differently, right? Everyone in here has probably, dealt with loss in your life of some sort, and I bet you, if you put 2 or 3 people in a room, they all kind of handled it differently. Some, it's like water off a duck's back, and some, loss of a family member or grandparent can really devastate them. So how do you deal with the differences just in humans? And how we take care of each other. So being engaged as leaders, but then also making sure you get them to that point where help is and can provide is really a difference maker in a lot of cases, that I think is important.
Yeah, resiliency certainly covers a remarkable spread of potential topics, certainly across society in many regards, and specifically within the Department of Defense, suicide, sexual assaults. There's a volume of topics that undoubtedly frequently get bent into the topic of resiliency, or at least the preventive side of how you get after those types of things. But I would offer at the so-called tactical level, just in the culture that you're trying to inculcate for your respective team, that there's a tremendous amount of value in such things as creating competition, creating stress. I'm not talking about running around being an a-hole. I'm just saying challenge people. You know what their limits are. Help them understand through trial and in some cases tribulation that they can overcome or continue to excel beyond that which they previously perceived their capability or capacity to be. And I think that goes long ways towards building the resiliency that will ultimately get after those other broader issues that were referenced a couple seconds ago. Thanks.
So when I look at resiliency, I think of the two words strength and flexibility. And nobody is born with strength and flexibility. Those are things that you can train towards. Whether you're trying to build up muscle, you would need the flexibility also before you tear something, right? So it's the same thing mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. Build yourself for strength and flexibility.
And one thing I'd like to add is that I think the military, the Department of Defense, is really good at reacting. We're not perfect, but we, when there's an event, whether it be a sexual assault case, far from perfect, but I think we're pretty good at the reaction. The hard part is getting after prevention, so it never happens in the first place. And you can imagine, there's an SOP if there's a suicide in an organization. We're pretty good at reacting once it's happened. But what's hard, it's a lot harder to fine tune, is the preparation to make sure that doesn't happen in the first place, so you never have to react. And so we're constantly working to get better at the prevention piece. A lot of time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears goes to prevention, But that, as you imagine, as you just think about it, you know, everyone's different. What's the trigger for one person versus another? So prevention is the key that we're really putting our money towards and our time and efforts. But it's also innumerably harder to get after prevention than it is, you know, the reaction once an event has already occurred.
That's a great point, Jared. In fact, I was going to say it. So that's great. But I'll elaborate just a little bit. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force recently came out with what he calls the spectrum of resiliency. And it gets to what Colonel Moreland's saying, and that is that if you can head it off at the pass before it becomes, hey, I've got to go to a mental health provider and have a sit-down session, then you're doing the right thing. And that actually starts with you. So having connections with your fellow ROTC cadets, or when you get to your unit, your fellow junior officers, leaning on your senior NCOs and talking to them, that's how you start building the resiliency that you need, that was alluded to by Johnny about the training for that. The spectrum of resiliency starts there, and then it goes into, all right, now it's a little bit more serious, I'm still having some issues, I need to talk to maybe a chaplain, and it continues to the right until you get to the point where, you know, it's going to be a medical situation that you're going to have, you know, formal care, if you want to call it that. All of this, though, what I've seen in my career, and it's extremely, I would say, encouraging, is that the military's, all the services writ large, have really started to focus more on what we call it the human weapon system, but the reality is it's just a people business, right? We're trying to take care of people because we want them to enjoy what they do and to be really good at it, so that we scare the living hell out of anybody that would dare to raise a fist at us. That's what it comes down to.
Thank you. So I think we got about 10, 12 minutes for questions. I want to turn it open. And Kathy, I'm looking, do you have, I don't see Kathy. But are there mics to go around? Or, oh, here's some mics up front. Here we go. Come on up here, right up there, so the group can hear. Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Brett Wiege. My question is for anyone who feels willing to answer. I was wondering, what is the best option that the United States has to address the issue of space debris, as you were speaking about earlier in the panel? Thank you.
I think it was space debris. Yeah. Go ahead.
You want to go first?
You just all jump in.
Okay. So some of the capabilities that we already have, we have LiDAR technology. We also have something called a WGS-84, I think is what it's called. But it's basically like a U2 platform where the nose cone is turned the other way. So we're flying at the edge of space, and we're literally videotaping space as we fly around the Earth. Seems very low tech, but it seems to be working. But that LiDAR technology, which is three-dimensional technology, similar to what you use for self-driving cars, we have those types of capabilities that we can use to collect what's happening in space.
Yeah, I forget the name of the movie, but that Sandra Bullock movie, remember, where she's in space and George Clooney flies off and all that fun stuff? I mean, that was based on, I think the event that happened in that movie was China or Russia blew up one of their own satellites and created thousands and thousands of pieces of space debris that until they fall into the atmosphere and burn up, they just continue to spin around the Earth, right? And that's pretty dangerous stuff, especially if they're moving at 1,000 miles an hour. I know that's just a movie, but our government does track that. I don't remember the exact size, and I don't want to get into it anyways, but they track thousands and thousands of pieces of space debris because, you know, any one of those, something the size of my thumb could, you know, ruin a multi-billion-dollar satellite if it hit it fast enough or in the right spot. So it is something that we have to pay attention to. And as more and more countries get involved in space, more and more junk is potentially out there. You know, they always talk about satellites don't fly, they fall. Right? It just depends on how quickly they're falling into the Earth's atmosphere before they burn up. But before they do that, they are all at risk or in risk of, you know, it's big sky, right? I mean, the risk of collisions is pretty low. But if one was to occur, or a country, you know, does decide to blow up their own, you know, satellite, it creates immeasurable, you know, danger for everything else we're trying to do. And as we take more advantage of space, you know, it becomes more crowded and more dangerous.
An Air Force pilot once told me, it's a big sky, it's a little bullet, but you don't want to be the one that catches it.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'll add, to me it's two parts. It's quantity and a quality, right? So up in the quality is something that we continually work on through all different programs and all the services. to stay one step ahead of our peers, our peer adversaries, right? Then there's the quantity piece of this, and so it's similar to a strategy that's being used in the Pacific right now, and that's agile combat employment. And in that theory, it's about making targeting more difficult, right? And so if you have a whole lot of satellites and a whole lot of systems and equipment, it's very difficult to target every single thing all the time in a rate or a manner that does not allow us to reconstitute that in time. And so there's a couple ways that we can do that. We can't get into it in all the different systems necessarily here, but at another time perhaps.
Yeah, we'll go here and then here.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Staff Sergeant Daugherty, United States Marine Corps. Just kind of to put into perspective for some of us who like to live on the ground, what effect is the cyber security, cyber warfare, what operations we're doing in cyberspace and in space, what effect is that having on our ground tactics or our ground capabilities, and what should we see or look forward to in the future on the ground? What impacts or what could we be doing to like help with that sort of thing?
So when we take a look at the joint training centers, what we find is capabilities we take for granted within cyber are disrupted. So if you're used to using GPS to move around and they can jam locally your space capability and you no longer have GPS, now you're bringing back to the capability of a map and a compass to figure out where you're going. You know, if you lose your computer network and you're no longer able to do the intelligence to do long-range fires, it limits your capabilities. So that's really the impact. So you have to learn how to be defensive and also learn how to use previous systems that aren't computerized.
So one of my recent jobs in the Army was to work at the Joint Readiness Training Center at Louisiana. Yes, thank you. We're still there. JRTC is a pit of despair for those of you who have ever been deployed there. Very exciting, right? But one of the things that we're doing to help people understand what are the cyber effects on the ground is we are attacking their local networks, just using typical internet activity, cell phone technology, that kind of thing, just the normal things that you would connect to when you're in a deployed environment. And what we're finding is a lot of organizations, when I say we're the problem, you'd be amazed how many times we can simply type in password 1234 and hack the printer. And then what we'll do is we'll print off tons of pictures of like my face doing this until they run out of ink and paper. And then when they reload it, we just keep hitting print. And so they kind of lose all of that access. And so it's teaching them to have local network security also. But we also have capabilities out there. The Air Force has some good ones. The Army has some good ones as well. And what it is ground-based cyber electronic warfare combination. And what we're doing is collecting signals on the ground. We send that signal back to either San Antonio or Fort Gordon, Georgia, or someplace like that, where they then hack that signal, send it back to the team that's on the ground, and then they're able to get in. And that's how we're doing kind of cyber collection and attack almost in real time, because it takes like less than 12 milliseconds to get the data back. And then sometimes they're hacking in less than 30 minutes, and then 12 milliseconds to get it back forward, and then another 12 milliseconds for the attack to begin. And so those are some capabilities that we're developing and continuing to practice in real time. So.
I don't want to be a broken record, but this, you know, it's just the evolution of warfare. You know, those of us that have been in the Army for 20 plus years spent most of that in the counterinsurgency fight, and we had clear air dominance. And in most cases, we had ground and network dominance as well. But the future fights against those peer or near peer adversaries that we talk about all the time, that's not going to be the case. They have capabilities that our recent adversaries did not. And so if we go into the next fight how we fought the last fight, we're going to find ourselves severely, at a disadvantage. And so thinking ahead and finding those ways to make sure that we don't lose our access to networks. I mean, you all take it for granted. What happens when your power goes out? We're so so reliant on access to the network and computer just power, right? And when that power goes out, you feel like you can't get anything done. Well, it's the same. We have to have redundancies and ways around figuring out, because if the adversary can do that to us, knock out our power, knock out our networks and our comms, where are we? And so that's a big challenge that everyone across the DoD is working on. Because our current threats have that capability, and we didn't really have to worry about that over the past 20 years. So it's a change and an evolution in how we fight and how we protect ourselves.
Hi, I'm just a volunteer here, but you guys talked about retaining talent within the military, like with tech and cyber and all that stuff. I was wondering how the military, I mean, like we have such wealths of knowledge within like American industry, like Silicon Valley, and then in our academic institutions. How do you, I guess, utilize and collaborate with these other sectors to like continue training the people in the military?
So from the Army Cyber Command perspective, where I was before I came here, we have a great working relationship with the University of Arizona and Augusta University in Georgia. And what we're able to do with those organizations is we actually have a building on the campus where we send some of our cyber warriors over there, so that we are working with industry. I would also give a plug for the National Guard and the Army Reserve, because those are people that are doing the job. They work at Cisco, and then on the weekend they help us attack some of our enemies, or they help us defend the network. And then when we get them for 2 weeks of training, or we get them for a deployment, there's I'm sorry, I forget the name of the mission, but there's a mission up at Fort Meade where we have a cyber battalion that deploys in. The Marines were doing it most recently. I think he just took over the mission, but it was Army National Guard for the longest time that kept rotating in, and they were creating the backbone for our attack network. And that's what they did for us as a nation, because they were all cyber warriors in their day job. And then for the National Guard, they were cyber warriors for us, and it was fantastic. That's how we keep up with industry also. Good question, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so maybe we make this the last question. Yep, go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. Captain Hahn, Marine Officer Instructor at Arizona State University. I, like yourselves, am a student of leadership. I love to take the wisdom from senior leaders and pass them on to myself, my Marines, my midshipmen. So I want to shift back to resilience very quickly. I know we're about running low on time here, but I'm sure at least one of you recently was knocked out of your boots, was hit with a wicked problem that made you stop and think about what to do next. So can we talk about a tool in your toolbox, either prevention or reaction? Prevention, what do you do to galvanize yourself? What do you do to harden your mental will? Or the reaction piece, who is your support system? What is your immediate action drill when you're looking down and you don't know what to do next? Thank you, gentlemen.
Let me ask a clarification on that one. So do you mean for us personally?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You personally.
All right. Yeah, Chief's looking at me because he knows the list is long of those types of things. I'll be honest with you. We're talking about it a little bit this morning, but really it's about resiliency in your own personal life. And so the pillars that make you who you are, you cannot deny those when you decide that I'm going to put on a uniform. And so if you like to work out, play soccer, whatever it is that you need to do to makes you, you have to do that. If you don't, when it comes time to pull from that cup, it's completely empty. And you've given everything to everyone else, and you have nothing left to give at that point when people really need you. And so I learned it the hard way because I was doing that. And I think most people probably started that way, where you just dove in and you gave everything you had all the time. And then when it was time to, hey, the ball's about to be hiked, and I've been in a three-point stance for 4 years, I'm going to fall on my face. And so you cannot do that. You have to be the example, and all of you will have to be the example for your units on how to maintain your personal balance. And a litmus that I use is and I told this to the airmen earlier, is that if I am feeling like I've got it under control, I'm wrong. I need to feel tension. I need to feel tension between what my family needs from me, what my job needs from me, what my peers need from me, you fill in the blank. I need to feel that tension. And if I'm feeling that tension, it's not fun, but it means that I'm probably somewhere where I need to be. And then I have a cup that I can actually pull from to help someone else out, or myself if I need to.
Personally, it was learning for myself exactly kind of what you said, is how much do I have left to give, and being able to make sure I can maintain that balance. And it really is across the entire spectrum. If you are not taking the intellectual, the spiritual, the physical, and balancing that and making sure that you're paying attention to it, paying attention to, I think you've said it correctly, you have your work, you have your family. If you ignore one, it will collapse, and that will then make you ineffective as a leader. So understanding how you have to maintain your personal balance, and at the end of the day, when you decide you've had enough time in your uniform, making sure that you can live with the decisions you've had to make.
I mean, for me, it's just been a life of trial and error. You know, things, the way I used to do things, you know, are not the way I do things now, and that's come through experience. I'm not going to say wisdom, but through experience. You know, one of the small things that we've probably all heard, you know, you go back to the golden rule and some other things, but, you know, when presented with a challenging situation, like you said, the first thing I do is try to rally the close, trusted advisors, ask for their thoughts, because I'm not the keeper of all the great ideas. You know, I like to bring the team in and find out what sounds like a good way to proceed, but to take a moment and pause instead of, you know, so you can take in the full situation. You know, it's like they say, if you get an email and you're not happy and you want to, you know, you type up an angry email, they tell you to sit on it for a little while, right? And you sit on that email, and you'd be amazed that with just a little bit of time and a cool down period, you know, gives you some clarity that, hey, I probably don't need to press send on that, or maybe I need to change some of the language. And I think that's just come from time of doing it the wrong way and getting, you know, throat punched. So, you know, some of it's experience that's not gone well. But I think if you look at a situation as something that you've never dealt with before, but as something to overcome, something to tackle, versus just a problem and woe was me. I mean, part of it is personality based. I'm a very glass is half full person, not glass half empty. So I can't change that in anyone else, but knowing how I look at things and my outlook, I think has helped me personally deal with recent adversity and again, you know, realizing I still don't have the answers. So, you know, if I take from my peers and others who have great ideas, why don't I give that a try for once? I've always been bashing my head against the rocks. Maybe the way, you know, Colonel Dudek does it is a better way to do it, and you'll be surprised.
I run the risk of offering with a couple cliches here, but if you bear with me, I'll try to make a point that first off, I fundamentally believe, and I know all of us do, that your core values and your belief system, whatever that happens to be, has to be firm and strong. So you're not spending time evaluating what you believe in, what you think, what you aspire your unit to be, or however you need to react in the moment, that you're firm in your foundational level. Secondly, I know you're obviously familiar with General Mattis and his reputation for being a voracious reader and putting himself in different instances and places so that you're not completely surprised. He routinely is quoted or relives a few different stories, but in virtually all cases, his basic theme is that he's not reacting to that given circumstance at a time. He's prepared, albeit with anecdote or whatever, any number of times before. And in that same vein, we know we have to train hard. Back to previous comment, you have to generate stress for yourself, for your team, and whatnot. So again, the moment does not consume you, regardless of how tragic or potentially complex it might be. One of my mentors frequently offers also that just in the day-to-day management of your organization, do only that which you can do. Simply meaning, and I think you get the point, that where you have a hierarchical structure, you have to stay above the fray, be focused on that which you specifically need to put your bandwidth and your attention on. And it was referenced earlier, point of friction in some cases, and other times just forward-thinking perspective. And then lastly, to borrow an aviation perspective, you know, when that crisis, or when that moment, doesn't have to be a crisis, but when that complex moment does present itself, in most cases, you know, we will sometimes say no fast hands in the cockpit. You know, do you have to immediately start sprinting, or do you have a chance, as Jared referenced, to analyze the situation a little bit? Sometimes it requires very, very quick decisions. Other times, maybe you can take a few deep breaths and gain a little additional clarity. But that's how I think, as an approach, it might lend itself to some usefulness at some point. Thank you.
Did you get what you needed? So when I talk about balance or resiliency, you know, people will talk about the three-legged stool, or they'll talk about a teeter-totter or whatever. I like to think of it as more of it's a symphony of life, you know. And if you think about a conductor up there, the drums never really go away. They're just quieter. Sometimes it's time for them to be loud. Sometimes it's time for the winds. Sometimes it's time for the strings. And sometimes they're all playing at the same time. And when they are, it's mass chaos. And so somebody has to tell them, like, quiet on the flutes there, you. It's time for strings to be a little louder. And that's what life really is. And so when you're walking through life, when you're thinking about resiliency, when you're thinking about balance, that's what I picture in my head is, you know, my wife is the strings. It's more strings right now, right? But then I go to work, well, strings have to be a little bit quieter, but they never go away. They're just a little bit quieter while the drums are beating, you know, something like that. That's how I picture it.
Thank you very much. So, one final thought for me is that whenever I'm around any of the ROTC students, I'm always amazed, and it just resonates up here with your level of dedication, because you've all decided to take this on. You decided you want to do this, right? So I'm of the generation when I was in high school, the draft ended, for instance, right? So we were allowed to decide what we were going to do at that point, whether to join or not to join or to do something else. You've all committed a long section of your life to serve the nation. And so on the theme of the weekend, just thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Also thanks to General Frakely and Kathy Cook, who arrange this every year. Because of General Frakely, frankly, I believe ASU gets this opportunity to host these kinds of leaders. Thanks to the panel very much. And Kathy, we're going to get out at 1:02. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend.